The final ticket hit the pass at 9:47 p.m. A single order of truffle risotto. 10 minutes later, the restaurant's CEO, a woman who critics called merciless, was sobbing at table 7. She stood up, silencing the dining room with a wave. "Find me the cook who made this. Now." The entire service stopped. In the steamy kitchen, a single dad, just a line cook, wiped his hands on a stained apron, unaware his life was already changing. His name was Leo, a 36-year-old single father who clocked in at 2 p.m. and prepped vegetables until his knuckles ached. To the Michelin-starred kitchen crew, he was just the quiet guy on the garnish station. To his daughter, he was everything. But in that one bowl, he had communicated a story, a memory, a loss, a hope, that the city's most formidable restaurateur instantly understood. The question wasn't just who he was. It was what profound secret had he baked into a simple risotto, and why had it broken a woman who never broke? Every day was the same brutal calculus. Leo Dawson woke at 5:45 a.m. in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled of old books and bacon. His daughter, Chloe, was 7. Her mother, Clara, had died of leukemia 3 years prior, a loss that hollowed him out and left him with a single purpose: keep moving. He'd make breakfast, pack a lunch adorned with cartoon characters, walk Chloe to school, then take 2 buses across the city to a job that paid $18 an hour. The restaurant was Eclat, a temple of modernist French cuisine where the average check topped $200. To the customers, it was an experience. To the 35 people working there, it was a machine of precise, exhausting ritual. Leo's station was the cold larder. For 10 hours a day, he julienned carrots, spun salad greens, piped rosettes of goat cheese mousse, and plated 80 identical compositions of heirloom beet and hazelnut. He was good, unnervingly consistent. But in a kitchen that worshipped fire and the sauté line, his was considered a secondary role, the kind of job with a turnover rate measured in months. He spoke little. The other cooks, most of them younger, fueled by ambition and Red Bull, joked he was a ghost. But the pastry chef, an older woman named Marta, noticed things. She saw how he'd taste a vinaigrette and without a word adjust the salt balance perfectly. She saw how his knife cuts were not just even but possessed a certain elegant rhythm. Once, when the sous chef was screaming about a broken emulsion, Leo had walked over, took the whisk, and fixed it with 3 quiet strokes. He handed it back and returned to his radishes. No one thanked him. He didn't expect it. His past was a closed book. The kitchen staff only knew he'd been there for 11 months, had a kid, and never missed a shift. The reality was buried. A decade ago, Leo Dawson had been a rising star. He'd graduated top of his class from the Culinary Institute of America. His externship was at Percy in New York. His first real job was as a commis at a 3 Michelin-starred palace in San Francisco. He was fast, creative, possessed a palate that chefs called once in a generation. Then he met Clara. She was a graphic designer, all laughter and light, who thought reducing a sauce was something you did to stock photos. He left the fine dining track for her, taking a head chef job at a beloved neighborhood bistro where the hours were human. They had Chloe. Life was sweet and small, and his. Then the diagnosis. The medical bills vaporized their savings. The bistro, sympathetic at first, couldn't hold his job open through months of hospice care. The night Clara died, Leo was holding her hand and simultaneously fielding a text from a temp agency about a line cook position. He took it. He had to. So the man who once crafted 7-course tasting menus now diced onions for minimum wage plus tips. The dream was not deferred. It was incinerated. All that remained was the muscle memory, the ingrained knowledge that sometimes surfaced in a perfectly balanced garnish or a rescued sauce. A ghost of who he was, haunting the body of who he had to be. Across the city, the woman who tasted his risotto was Elena Vance, 34 years old, the founder and CEO of Vance Hospitality Group, which owned Eclat and 4 other critically acclaimed restaurants. She was a story in herself, daughter of Ukrainian immigrants who started as a dishwasher, worked her way through business school, and built an empire not on family money, but on relentless, icy perfectionism. A recent Forbes profile called her the patron saint of punishing standards. She was known to fire a sommelier for a single warm bottle of Chardonnay. She had reduced veteran maitre d's to tears during Saturday night service. Her emotion was a business asset, a controlled fury aimed at excellence. But that night something broke. The risotto was a simple off-menu request for a regular with dietary restrictions. The executive chef was off. The sous chef, overwhelmed, barked at Leo to handle the gluten-free thing. What Leo produced was not simply competent. It was a memory. He used carnaroli rice, toasting it slowly in shallots and a splash of white wine. He reduced himself. Instead of standard stock, he used a roasted mushroom broth he'd made from scraps, infused with a single stolen thread of saffron and a finish of lemon zest. He finished it with a knob of cultured butter he'd whipped with parsley and a whisper of black truffle, a technique from his old San Francisco days. It was creamy but textured, deeply savory yet bright. A dish that spoke of care, not just technique. Elena Vance took one bite, then another. She set her fork down with a quiet click. Her dining companion, a venture capitalist, stopped talking. They watched as she stared at the bowl, her eyes welling up, a single tear tracing a path through her impeccable makeup. It wasn't about the flavor profile. It was the story it told. It tasted like sacrifice. It tasted like love strained through grief. It tasted, inexplicably, like her own mother's cooking, from a tiny kitchen in Kiev, a feeling she hadn't accessed in 20 years. In that creamy, perfect rice, she didn't taste a line cook following a recipe. She tasted a soul. Who made this? Her voice was a rasp. The server, terrified, stammered that it was from the kitchen. I asked who asterisk. A manager was summoned. The ticket was examined. It said garnish as the station. Elena stood up. Stop service. The command, delivered calmly, froze the room. I want every cook from that kitchen in the dining room. Now. Chaos of a silent, terrified kind descended. In the kitchen, the executive chef, having rushed back, was purple with rage. Who the hell touched the risotto? Leo, wiping down his station, looked up. I did, chef. The look he received was pure venom. You're fired, get out. But before Leo could move, Elena Vance walked through the swinging doors into the steam and the noise. She ignored the executive chef. Her eyes scanned the line of confused cooks in their stained whites. They landed on Leo. On his tired eyes, his humble posture, the faded tattoo of a sprig of rosemary on his wrist. A chef, tattoo but old. She walked up to him. The kitchen was dead silent. Your name? Leo, ma'am. You have a daughter. It wasn't a question. He flinched. Yes. You used saffron in the mushroom broth. Why? He paused, thrown. It bridges the earthy and the floral. It adds depth without being sweet. And the lemon zest at the end, to cut the richness, to make it remember itself. Elena Vance studied him for what felt like an hour. The entire restaurant's revenue for the night was evaporating by the second. Then she said, come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't be late. She turned and left. The service did not resume. The fallout was instant. Leo was not fired, but he was a pariah. The executive chef refused to speak to him. The rumor spread that he had poisoned the boss with sentimentality. That night, as Leo took the late bus home, his mind raced. Was this a prelude to being fired with more ceremony? A lawsuit for some imagined breach? He looked at his phone, at a picture of Chloe sleeping, and felt a cold dread. He couldn't lose this job. At 9:59 the next morning, he stood outside a sleek office on the top floor of a downtown building. He was still in his street clothes. Elena Vance's assistant waved him in. The office was all glass and minimalist art. Elena was at her desk, staring at a computer screen. She didn't look up. Sit, he sat. She finally turned from the screen. Her eyes were red-rimmed as if she hadn't slept. I had the dish analyzed. Leo blinked. Analyzed? By a food lab. And by a psychologist I consult for menu development. She leaned forward. The technical execution is master level. The emotional resonance is off the charts. My question is not how you cooked it. My question is why a man who can cook like that is working a garnish station for $18 an hour. Leo's throat tightened. I need the job. That's not an answer, she said, her voice softening in a way that was more frightening than her anger. I lost my wife. I have a daughter to support. Elena nodded slowly. I know I had you background checked last night. The invasion was so total, so cold, Leo felt stripped bare. I see a Culinary Institute of America diploma. I see a stellar early career, then a decade of silence and survival jobs. Tell me, Leo, what is in that risotto that I tasted? Is it grief? He was silent, his jaw clenched. Or is it something else? She pressed. Is it anger? Before he could answer, her desk phone buzzed. She hit speaker. Her assistant's voice came through, tense. Alina, it's the bank. They're on line 1. They say if we can't show a positive projection for Eclat by the end of the quarter, they're calling the loan. Alina's face went pale. She looked from the phone to Leo, a desperate calculation flashing in her eyes. The empire built on perfection was crumbling, and she was staring at a line cook who might, just might, hold a secret she desperately needed. She ended the call and leveled her gaze at him. I have a proposal for you, one you cannot refuse. The proposal was this. He would not return to the Garnish station. Instead, for the next 30 days, Leo Dawson would work directly for Alina Vance. His official title would be culinary consultant. His real job was to save her flagship restaurant. He would design a new, simplified tasting menu for Eclat, one dish from him, each week, around which the entire service would pivot. If after 1 month, restaurant critic visits and revenue showed a positive trend, he would be promoted to sous chef at triple his current salary. If not, he would be terminated, and a personal non-disparagement clause would ensure he never worked in this city again. You're leveraging my grief, Leo said, his voice quiet. Alina didn't blink. I'm leveraging the only truth in that kitchen. Do we have a deal? He thought of Chloe, of rent due in 12 days. He nodded. The news detonated in the kitchen of Eclat like a grenade. The executive chef, a man named Laurent who had trained in Lyon for 15 years, threw his chef's knife into a cutting board and walked out, taking 2 of his key sauciers with him. The remaining staff was a tinderbox of resentment and confusion. A Garnish cook, promoted over everyone. Marta, the pastry chef, was the only one who offered a thin smile. The universe has a sense of humor, no. The atmosphere turned toxic. Leo's first attempt to work the pass was met with deliberate slowness. Lost tickets, and sizzle pans left just a little too long on the flame. Alina's intervention was swift and brutal. She appeared on the line during prep the next day, not in her usual blazer but in a pristine chef's coat. From this moment, she announced to the stunned crew, Leo Dawson has creative command of this kitchen. You will follow his direction as if it were mine. If you have a problem with that, your final paycheck is at the front desk. No one moved. She turned to Leo. Your first dish, 72 hours. The critic from the Chronicle is booked for Friday. The pressure was absolute, engineered to force a diamond or a fracture. Leo retreated not to a fancy test kitchen but to his apartment. He spread notebooks on his small table next to Chloe's crayon drawings. The question was paralyzing. What could he make that was both deeply personal and commercially viable? He couldn't just recreate the risotto. That was a one-time emotional lightning strike. He thought of Clara, not her illness but her joy. She loved picnics. Their first date was cheap wine and a baguette in a park. An idea, fragile but clear, began to form. He called it a reconstructed picnic. A deceptively simple plate. A single perfect slice of rustic sourdough toasted over open flame. Next to it, a chilled porcelain spoon holding a sphere of tomato water gelée, clear as a ruby, bursting with the essence of summer. A smear of chicken liver mousse, light as air, flavored with port and a hint of orange. A single cornichon, shaved transparently thin. It was nostalgia stripped of cliché, technique hiding in plain sight. He presented it to the kitchen on Thursday. The silence was skeptical. Bread and pâté. You're joking, muttered the new lead line cook, a young hotshot named Derek. Leo didn't argue. He cooked it for them from start to finish. They watched his hands, the confident scoring of the bread, the precise temperature control for the gelée, the feather-light whip of the mousse. When they tasted it, the skepticism didn't vanish, but it mutated into a grudging, uncomfortable respect. The dish wasn't about luxury. It was about memory made edible. Friday night the critic came. Alina watched from the shadows of the dining room. Leo was on the pass, calling tickets, his voice steady but his knuckles white. The reconstructed picnic went out, time stretched. Then the server returned with an empty plate and a note passed from the critic to the kitchen. It read, "Finally, something that remembers its food." It wasn't a rave, but it was a reprieve. The weekend services saw a curious shift. Regulars noticed the new dish. It sold out. The kitchen, operating on professional pride if not personal affection, began to execute Leo's vision with sharper focus. But Alina wanted more than good reviews. She needed a phenomenon. For week 2, she upped the ante. She told Leo his next dish would be the centerpiece of a private dinner for 3 of the bank's most senior loan officers. Make them feel something. Make them forget they're here to shut us down. The stakes were now existential. Leo, digging deeper, crafted a dish he called Forest Floor. A seared scallop resting on a bed of creamy celery root puree, surrounded by a glaçage of wild mushroom tea, and finished with a dusting of powdered black garlic and tiny, foraged wood sorrel leaves. It was a landscape on a plate, a taste of damp earth and elusive sweetness. It was also, though no one knew, an homage to the walks he and Clara used to take in the redwoods when the future felt infinite. The bank dinner was a tense, silent affair. The officers, suited in severe, ate with analytical detachment until the Forest Floor arrived. One of them, a woman in her 50s, took a bite and stopped. She put her fork down and looked out the window for a long moment. When she looked back, her eyes were bright. She said nothing, but she finished every bite. The loan wasn't approved that night, but the immediate closure was taken off the table. Alina had bought time. This small victory, however, ignited a different kind of fire. A food blogger, tipped off by a disgruntled former saucier, published a piece with the headline, "Line Cooked to Savior, the Calculated Heartbreak of Eclat." It painted Leo as a sob story exploited by a ruthless CEO, his tragic past packaged as a marketing gimmick. The article went viral in food circles. Online comments were savage. Poverty porn on a porcelain plate. Using a dead wife to sell scallops. Chloe, now at an age where kids had smartphones, came home from school asking what exploited meant. Leo's private grief was now public currency. The backlash created an unexpected, perverse result. Reservations at Eclat, which had been slowly climbing, suddenly spiked. People didn't come for the food, they came for the story, to see the widower chef. They pointed at Leo through the kitchen pass-through, took surreptitious photos. The humiliation was a slow burn. He was performing his pain for a paying audience. Alina saw only the numbers. "Controversy is oxygen," she told him, her tone chillingly pragmatic. "We will use it." Leo began to crack under the dual pressure of creation and scrutiny. He started having nightmares of burning kitchens and empty plates. He snapped at Chloe over a spilled glass of milk, then collapsed into tears, hugging her tightly. He was trapped. The talent that was his escape had become his cage. It was Marta who threw him a lifeline. Late one night after service, she found him scrubbing an already clean station. "You know," she said, lighting a cigarette by the back door, "my father was a fisherman in Portugal. He said the sea gives you gifts, but only if you respect its darkness. You are cooking from the darkness, Leo, but you are letting her sell the light." The observation was a key turning in a lock. He was so focused on fulfilling Alina's demands, he had surrendered the narrative of his own food. He decided to reclaim it. For week 3, he announced his dish without consulting Alina, clearing. It would be a transparent broth, served in a hollowed-out onion, steamed for hours until the onion itself became edible, sweet, and delicate. The broth was a complex clarification of roasted bones, root vegetables, and herbs, but finished with a single drop of chili oil that hung in the center like a tiny sun. It was a dish about clarity, about distillation, about the moment after tears. It was defiantly uncommercial, a quiet poem in a room screaming for an anthem. Alina was furious. "This is not the time for subtlety," she argued in her office. Leo stood his ground for the first time. "You hired me for my truth. This is it. This is the clearing after the storm. Take it or fire me now." They stared each other down, a battle of wills between art and commerce. Reluctantly, she acquiesced. The dish was added to the menu. The night it debuted, a well-known and famously cruel influencer came in, live streaming his meal to 500,000 followers. He took one spoonful of the clearing, made a theatrical gagging face, and declared it flavored hot water for sad people. The clip went viral within minutes. The restaurant's social media was flooded with ridicule. Alina's phone rang incessantly with worried investors. The fragile momentum they'd built was evaporating in real time. In the kitchen, the staff looked at Leo with a mixture of pity and blame. The experiment was failing, and he was the reason. As he was about to leave, defeated, the hostess handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was a note on elegant, heavy stationery. It read, "The clearing was the most honest thing I've eaten in a decade. It tasted like peace. Thank you." It was signed by a legendary, now-retired chef, a man whose approval was the holy grail of the industry. He had been dining anonymously at the chef's counter. Leo showed the note to Alina. Her anger dissolved into something like awe. She immediately leaked the note to a trusted food journalist. The story flipped overnight, from exploitative gimmick to tortured artist validated by a master. The narrative Alina couldn't control had been hijacked by a higher authority. Reservations skyrocketed again, this time with a different, more serious clientele. They had crossed a chasm. But success attracted new predators. A week later, a man in an expensive suit approached Leo as he was unlocking his bike after work. He handed Leo a business card for the Apex Group, a conglomerate known for poaching culinary talent. "We've been watching your work, Leo. We're opening a flagship in the city. Name your price. Double whatever Vance is paying you. A real chef's kitchen. No emotional manipulation, just food." The offer was a siren song. An escape from Alina's shadow, from the daily humiliation into pure, respected craft. He pocketed the card, his heart pounding. That night, as he lay awake, he realized the true proposal was only now beginning. He wasn't just fighting to save a restaurant or feed his daughter. He was fighting for the soul of his own gift. Would he sell it to the highest bidder? Would he let Alina continue to package his pain? Or was there a third path he hadn't yet imagined? The choice was his, and the clock was ticking. Across town, Alina Vance was on the phone, her voice tight with a new, more dangerous fear. She had just learned that the banker who loved the forest floor dish was being transferred. Her reprieve was ending, and the man from Apex Group had just left her a voicemail inquiring about the buyout potential of Eclat, human assets. The wolves were no longer at the door. They were inside. Alina's investigation into the Apex Group revealed a connection she never expected. The conglomerate was not just a random corporate predator. It was headed by Robert Thorne, a venture capitalist who had been her silent minority partner in two of her earlier failed restaurant ventures. He had lost money. This wasn't a poaching attempt. It was a hostile takeover dressed up as a job offer. Thorne knew that Leo, the emotional engine of Eclat's resurgence, was also its most vulnerable point. If he could pull Leo out, the restaurant and Alina's entire holding company would collapse under its debt. He could then buy the pieces for cents on the dollar. The business card in Leo's pocket wasn't an opportunity. It was a detonator. She didn't tell Leo this immediately. Instead, she called him to her office at 7 the next morning. The note from the retired chef was framed on her wall. She wasted no time. "The Apex Group approached you." It wasn't a question. Leo, caught off guard, nodded. "You're considering it." He hesitated. "I'm considering how to provide for my daughter." Alina leaned forward, her usual icy composure replaced by a raw, startling intensity. "What if I told you that offer isn't about your talent? It's about destroying me. And if I fall, you don't get a fancy new kitchen. You get blacklisted. Thorne uses people, then discards them. He's done it before." She slid a file across the desk. It contained profiles of 3 other chefs Thorne had headhunted over the past 5 years. Each was now out of the industry, bound by crushing non-compete clauses, their reputations in tatters. Leo felt the walls closing in. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I need you to understand what we're fighting," Alina said, her voice dropping. "And because I am going to make you a real counteroffer, not as your boss, as your partner." The proposal was staggering. She offered him a 10% equity stake in Eclat, not a salary, a share of the restaurant itself. It would be held in a trust for Chloe until the debt was cleared, but it was his. The catch? He had to create and execute the menu for a single make-or-break event. a 10-course gala dinner for 50 of the city's most powerful influencers and critics, to be held in 3 weeks. The goal was not just to impress, but to secure enough buzz and private investment to pay off the bank loan entirely. If it failed, they both lost everything. Leo left the office in a daze: partner, ownership, a legacy for Chloe. It was everything he'd burned out hopping for a decade ago, but the pressure was now astronomical. He wasn't just cooking for a review, he was cooking for his future and for Alina's survival. The kitchen, sensing the seismic shift, finally began to align behind him. Marta took him aside. "Equity, you must be a wizard or she is truly desperate. Either way, we are with you." For the first time, he felt like a chef, not a pawn. He threw himself into planning the gala menu. It would be a narrative in 10 plates telling the story of a journey from loss to clarity. He called it the alchemy of memory. Dishes included embers, a charcoal-grilled octopus with smoked paprika ash; veal, a transparent ravioli filled with a consommé that burst in the mouth; and for the finale, phoenix, a dessert of caramelized white chocolate, passion fruit gel, and edible gold leaf, designed to look like a rising flame. It was ambitious, technically insane, and deeply personal. Then the first sabotage hit. 2 days into gala prep, Leo arrived to find his meticulously organized walk-in cooler unplugged. Hundreds of dollars of delicate produce reduced to wilted waste. The security footage from that corner was mysteriously corrupted. The message was clear: not everyone in the building wanted him to succeed. Paranoia set in. He started sleeping at the restaurant, on a cot in the office, afraid to leave his prep unattended. The stress took a direct toll on Chloe. Her teacher called. Chloe had been drawing pictures of her dad crying in a kitchen of fire. She was having nightmares. Leo, gutted, knew he had to choose between being present for his daughter and securing her future. He made a painful decision. He called his sister, who lived 3 hours away, and asked if Chloe could stay with her for the final 2 weeks before the gala. It was the hardest goodbye of his life. As he watched her wave from his sister's car, he felt like he was betraying the very reason he was doing all of this. Back in the city, Alina was fighting her own battles. Thorne, realizing his soft approach had failed, went public. A financial news site published a devastating analysis titled "Vance Hospitality, a house of cards built on a tearful risotto." It dissected the restaurant's finances, highlighted the bank's nervousness, and painted Alina as a desperate hype merchant exploiting a widower's grief. Reservation cancellations poured in. The gala, which had been half sold, now had tables dropping daily. Alina's investors were calling, demanding answers she didn't have. In a move of sheer defiance, Alina decided to double down on the narrative. She invited a documentary film crew from a prestigious streaming service to embed in the kitchen for the final week before the gala. "If they want a story," she told Leo, "we'll give them the real one, the sweat, the fear, the stakes, not the gossip." It was a huge risk. The cameras would capture every mistake, every moment of doubt, but it would also capture the artistry. Leo, who shunned the spotlight, had no choice but to agree. The presence of the cameras changed the energy. The subtle sabotage stopped. The staff, now conscious of being documented for posterity, rallied with a newfound professionalism. Leo, though exhausted, found a second wind. He began teaching, truly teaching, the cooks around him. He explained the science behind his emulsions, the philosophy behind his flavor pairings. Derek, the skeptical line cook, slowly transformed from a detractor to his most dedicated lieutenant. The kitchen was becoming a team. 1 week before the gala, during a late-night interview with the documentary director, Alina broke. The question was simple: "Why is this so personal for you?" The camera held on her face as she struggled to form an answer. Then she told a story she had never shared publicly. Her mother, the cook from Kiev, had saved every penny to send Alina to business school. She died of a heart attack the week before Alina's graduation, working a double shift at a bakery. "The first person who believed in me never saw me succeed," Alina said, a single tear falling. "This restaurant, this company, it's my answer to her. It's proof her sacrifice meant something. And if I lose it," she didn't finish. The raw confession, filmed in the quiet office, would later become the emotional core of the documentary. "Leo, watching the playback with the director the next day, finally saw Alina not as a CEO, but as a fellow human haunted by a ghost. 2 days before the gala, disaster struck from an unforeseen direction. The city's health department arrived for a random inspection. They found a single minor violation, a container of clarified butter labeled incorrectly. It was a trivial issue, normally warranting a warning. Instead, the inspector wrote a citation that triggered an automatic C grade, which by city law had to be posted at the entrance for 30 days. A C grade posted the day before a critical gala was a death sentence. The inspector, when pressed, admitted he'd been encouraged to be thorough after an anonymous tip about food safety concerns at Eclat. Thorne's fingerprints were all over it. Alina was incandescent with rage but also perilously close to defeat. Leo, however, reacted with an eerie calm. He'd faced worse in a hot kitchen during a dinner rush. He proposed a brazen plan. They would not hide the grade. They would frame it, literally, and display it at the entrance to the gala with a placard that read, "We believe in transparency, in our ingredients, our finances, and our inspections. Tonight, we invite you to judge for yourself." It was a monumental gamble, turning a symbol of failure into a banner of honesty. The night of the gala arrived. The dining room was transformed. The C grade, framed in elegant black, was the first thing guests saw. It sparked whispered conversations, but also, curiously, a sense of intrigue. The documentary cameras rolled, capturing every tense moment. Leo in the kitchen was a portrait of focused intensity. The first course went out, then the second, the third. Each plate returned to the kitchen clinically clean, the silence more terrifying than any complaint. Midway through the fifth course, Vale, the maitre d', hurried back with a message from a famously hard-to-please food critic. Leo's heart stopped. The note read, "Tell the chef he has just made me remember why I fell in love with food." A wave of relief, so potent it felt like a drug, washed through the kitchen. They were going to make it. Then during the eighth course, Leo's sister called. Chloe had spiked a fever of 104. She was crying, asking for her dad. The sound of his daughter's weak, scared voice over the phone, while 50 of the most important people in the city waited for his ninth course, created an impossible fracture in his soul. He looked at the bustling kitchen, at the tickets hanging, at Alina watching him from the pass with worried eyes. He had 5 minutes to plate the Phoenix dessert. He had a child 3 hours away who needed him. The two futures he was trying to build were crashing into each other in the worst possible moment. He made a decision. He called Derek over, quickly showed him the final plating sequence for the dessert. "You have to finish this. I have to go." Derek, wide-eyed, nodded. Leo ripped off his apron, not bothering to explain to Alina. He ran out the back door, into the alley, leaving the most important night of his professional life in the hands of a 24-year-old line cook. The documentary camera, perched in the corner, captured his exit. The final shot of Act 2 was the kitchen door swinging shut, and the stunned, betrayed face of Alina Vance, watching her entire world walk out into the night. In the silence that followed Leo's exit, the kitchen held its breath. Alina Vance stared at the swinging door, her face a mask of utter devastation. The documentary camera zoomed in, capturing the moment her empire truly teetered. Then she turned to the kitchen, to Derek standing frozen by the dessert station, to Marta, whose eyes were wide with shock. Alina took a deep, shuddering breath. The CEO vanished, and the restaurateur who started as a dishwasher took over. "Okay," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Derek, you watched him. Can you finish the plating?" Derek, swallowing hard, nodded. "Marta, support him on the pastry elements. Everyone else, look alive. We have 50 guests waiting for a story. Let's give them one they won't forget." She stepped onto the pass, calling tickets herself. The kitchen, fueled by a mixture of panic and loyalty, snapped into action. Meanwhile, Leo was breaking every traffic law on the highway north. His hands trembled on the wheel. He'd abandoned his post, his partner, his future. But the sound of Chloe's feverish cry was a siren he was powerless to ignore. He arrived at his sister's house just after midnight. Chloe was asleep, her fever broken thanks to medication, her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit. Leo sank to the floor beside her bed, tears of exhaustion and relief finally coming. He had chosen. And in that quiet room, he knew it was the only choice he could ever make. Back at Eclat, the gala concluded. The final Phoenix desserts, plated under Derek's nervous but capable hands, were served. The guests, unaware of the drama in the kitchen, gave a standing ovation. The reviews that trickled out over the next 48 hours were not just positive, they were rapturous. The critic from the Times wrote that the meal was a masterclass in emotional storytelling through food, specifically praising the Phoenix dessert for its audacious hope. The framed C grade was mentioned in every article, not as a mark of shame, but as a symbol of defiant transparency. The documentary footage of Leo's exit and Alina's recovery became the defining cliffhanger of the series' trailer. But the financial calculus was still dire. The buzz was incredible, but the bank loan was due in full in 72 hours. The gala had not generated the immediate private investment Alina had prayed for. She sat in her office, staring at the numbers, preparing to call her lawyers to begin dissolution procedures. Then her assistant buzzed. "Alina, there's a call for you on line 1. It's Jameson Cole." Her blood ran cold. Cole was the founder of a global hospitality fund, a legendarily ruthless investor who never took meetings, only acquisitions. She answered, expecting a lowball offer for the carcass of her company. Instead, Cole's voice was crisp. "I saw the documentary clip, the one where your chef leaves for his child. I also read the reviews. I'm prepared to wire the full amount of the bank loan as a straight equity investment for a 20% stake in Vance Hospitality." Alina was speechless. It was a lifeline on fair terms. "Why?" she finally managed. Cole paused. "Because in that clip I saw two things most businesses spend billions trying to fake: authentic talent and authentic priority. The chef prioritized his family. You prioritized the service. That's a culture. That's an investment. Do we have a deal?" Alina closed her eyes. "We have a deal." The restaurant was saved, but Leo was gone. He sent a formal letter of resignation from his sister's house, expecting, perhaps even hoping for, a furious lawsuit. Instead, he received a package by courier. Inside was a single key, a contract, and a note from Alina. The contract was for the 10% equity stake they had agreed upon, vested immediately. The note read, "You kept your promise. You made them remember why they love food. The key is to the new test kitchen. The space is yours to use as you see fit. No conditions." There was no apology, no request to return, just a fulfillment of her word. Leo was stunned. He had abandoned her on the most important night, and she had rewarded him. A month later, with Chloe fully recovered and back in school, Leo finally drove into the city. He used the key. It opened the door to a bright, sunlit space in a converted warehouse not far from Eclat. It was fully equipped, pristine, and silent. On the stainless steel counter sat a single envelope. Inside was a menu template, blank except for a header, "Dawson," and a post-it note in Alina's handwriting, "A place for your truth on your terms." It was not an offer to come back. It was an offer to begin. Leo stood in the empty kitchen, the hum of the refrigeration the only sound. He thought of the garnish station, of the gala, of Chloe's small hand in his. He called Marta first, then Derek. Within a week, a small team had assembled, not based on resumes, but on loyalty and heart. Dawson's would not be a fine dining temple. It would be a weekday lunch spot, open from 11 to 3. No tasting menus. Just a few perfect, rotating dishes. A place where he could be home for dinner with his daughter every single night. The opening day of Dawson's was a quiet affair. No press release, just a sandwich board on the sidewalk. The first dish was a roasted carrot soup with a dollop of ginger cream. The second, a savory bread pudding with wild mushrooms and Gruyere. Simple, profound, and affordable. By noon, a line stretched down the block. The food, unfettered by spectacle, spoke for itself. Alina Vance did not visit that day, but that evening a delivery arrived at Leo's apartment. A single bottle of excellent Ukrainian honey vodka and a note. "To new beginnings, and to mothers." Leo understood. He poured a small glass, raised it to the photograph of Clara on his bookshelf, and drank. The documentary series, titled The Last Service, premiered 3 months later. It was a sensation. The raw footage of the kitchen drama, the emotional backstories, the nail-biting gala night, and the unresolved tension between Leo and Alina captivated audiences. The final episode followed both paths. Alina, securing her empire's future and beginning plans for a more humane, chef-driven restaurant group, and Leo, finding peace and purpose in his small, luminous lunch spot. The final scene intercut the two kitchens, Eclat during a massive dinner service, a well-oiled machine of elegance, and Dawson's at 2:55 p.m., Leo wiping down his counter as the last customer left, smiling at a drawing Chloe had taped to the fridge. The voiceover was Alina from her final interview. "We talk about success as a mountain you climb, but sometimes it's a river you follow. It forks. You take the branch that lets you breathe. That doesn't make one path wrong. It makes both paths true." The surprise, the detail that cemented the legend, came a year later. At the annual Industry Awards, a new category was introduced: Culinary Impact. The first-ever recipient was not a famous chef or a trendy restaurateur. It was the documentary series itself. In his acceptance speech, the director revealed that the initial funding for the documentary had been secretly provided by a single angel investor, Alina Vance. She had commissioned the film not as a publicity stunt, but as an act of preservation, to capture the fragile human truth of a restaurant before it was lost, whether to failure or to success. Leo, watching the stream from his quiet kitchen, finally understood the depth of her gambit. She hadn't just been selling a story. She had been documenting a sacrifice, and in doing so, had saved them both. Today, Dawson's thrives. Leo still works the line 5 days a week. Chloe, now 8, does her homework at a corner table. Alina's group has expanded with a stated mission to fund chef-owned small concepts. She and Leo meet for coffee quarterly, a quiet ritual where they discuss food, business, and never once mention the night he walked out. The black rubber bracelet he once wore is now in a frame in Dawson, next to his first dollar. The inscription is still visible: "Never leave a fallen." He learned its true meaning wasn't about staying in the fight at all costs. It was about knowing who you're fighting for. And so the story that began with a tear and a tasting menu closes not with a bang, but with the steady, reliable hum of a convection oven and the laughter of a child in the dining room. A single father, a line cook, reminded the world that the most powerful ingredient isn't truffle or gold. It's truth. And sometimes that truth tastes like a simple, perfect bowl of soup, served with time to go home. So what does this story leave us with? Not a fairy tale, but something more valuable: a blueprint. It shows that the line between obscurity and recognition is often drawn not by talent alone, but by a single moment of genuine connection. Leo Dawson's hands held the same skill for years, silent and unseen, until a bowl of rice communicated a language Alina Vance understood in her bones. Her tears weren't just for the flavor. They were for the shared, unspoken understanding of loss and the stubborn will to build something beautiful from the wreckage. The restaurant industry, with its brutal hierarchies and soaring burnout rates, is a microcosm of a wider truth. It asks, how many geniuses are currently dicing onions in the background, their potential masked by circumstance, by grief, by the simple need to get to the next shift? The myth of the solo genius chef is a compelling one, but reality is more often a collaboration between unlikely partners, between the quiet craftsman and the fierce visionary, between memory and ambition. Leo and Alina's paths diverged, yet both found a form of victory. Not the victory of conquering the other, but of understanding their own non-negotiable terms. For Leo, success became a small, sunlit room where he could be both a father and an artist. For Alina, it became building a system that could protect the very authenticity she once commodified. Their story argues that the greatest success isn't reaching a pinnacle, but finding the altitude at which you can breathe. This is the lingering question the documentary leaves on the plate. What is the true cost of a dream, and who gets to set the price? Is it worth any sacrifice? Leo's answer, written in his daily hours and his empty dinner pass, was a quiet no. Alina, written in spreadsheets and expansion plans, was a complicated yes. Both are valid. Both are human. The world is filled with unseen Leos and relentless Elenas, the custodians of deep, quiet talent and the architects who build stages for it, for better or worse. Their collision reminds us that magic doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in the messy, pressurized, often unfair space where art meets commerce, where personal history meets public consumption. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it creates a new kind of alchemy, one that feeds both the body and the soul. Subscribe if you believe the most powerful stories aren't just told, they're tasted. If you believe that talent whispers before it shouts, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to listen, and then to pass the knife.